Optimus Primal didn't become a leader by winning battles. He became one by deciding who would carry the cost. And more often than not, that cost was himself. Because the instinct to protect others kept putting everyone in danger. I learned that lesson the hard way, the night I realized something I built was hurting the people who depended on me. By the end of this, you'll understand why leadership isn't about winning, and why doing the right thing can feel exactly like failure. This is Disassembled Heroes and Villains, and this is the story of Optimus Primal and the price of choosing responsibility over your own ambition. Optimus Primal was never supposed to be a war leader. He wasn't forged for conquest. He wasn't built to command armies. He wasn't even meant to fight a war at all. Primal was an explorer. His mission wasn't domination. It was discovery. To observe, to learn, to return home with knowledge, not victory. And then, everything went wrong. The moment the Maximals crashed into a hostile world, leadership stopped being optional. No reinforcements coming, no time to wait until someone more qualified stepped forward. Someone had to take responsibility, and Primal stayed. That's the part people miss when they talk about leadership. It doesn't arrive when you feel ready. It arrives when walking away would cost too much. Primal doesn't step up because he's confident. He steps up because if he doesn't, everyone else pays for it. That's the difference between authority and responsibility. Authority wants preparation. Responsibility demands presence. Again and again, Primal is forced to lead not because he has all the answers, but because hesitation would be fatal. Every decision carries weight. Every mistake costs lives, and every time he doubts himself, the burden doesn't disappear. It just waits. That's how responsibility works in the real world too. Most men don't become leaders at the moment they feel strong. They become leaders when something fragile depends on them. A family, a livelihood, a future that doesn't care how prepared you feel. Confidence comes later, if it comes at all. What matters first is staying. Staying when you're unsure, staying when you're exhausted, staying when the outcome isn't guaranteed. Primal never pretends he's fearless. He questions himself constantly. He weighs every choice. He absorbs the doubt so others don't have to. That's the quiet truth about leadership. Responsibility doesn't ask if you're prepared. It asks if you will stay. Stay when it's uncomfortable. Stay when it's unfair. Stay when the cost keeps rising and the reward stays unclear. Optimus Primal doesn't lead because he was ready. He led because someone had to. And sometimes, that's the only qualification that matters. But staying is only the beginning. Once you accept responsibility, a harder question follows: how you carry it. Because leadership isn't just about showing up. It's about deciding what kind of strength you're willing to use once you're there. Power offers faster rewards. Protection demands slower ones. And Optimus Primal learns very quickly that the strongest choice is rarely the most forceful one. There's a version of leadership that looks impressive from the outside. Decisive, dominant, unapologetic. It ends problems quickly, it silences oppositions, it leaves no doubt about who's in control. And in Beast Wars, that version of leadership is always close at hand. Optimus Primal is surrounded by violence, surrounded by enemies who believe strength means domination, and that mercy is just another word for weakness. Again and again, Primal is offered the easier path. Use more force, strike first, end the threat permanently. Even when it would be justified, even when it would be effective. But Primal refuses, not because he lacks power, but because he understands its costs. True strength isn't measured by how much damage you can deal. It's measured by how much damage you're willing to absorb so others don't have to. Primal constantly places himself between danger and his crew. He takes the hit first, he stands in the open while others regroup, he becomes the shield, not because it's noble, but because it's necessary. That choice looks inefficient. It looks risky. It looks like weakness to anyone who confuses dominance with control. And that's where Dinobot enters the picture. Dinobot isn't chaos. He isn't cruelty. He has a code. Early on, Dinobot is given the chance to end Optimus Primal. Not through battle, but through circumstance. And he refuses. Not out of mercy, not out of protection, but because a victory without honor means nothing to him. The moment matters. Because it proves restraint doesn't come from weakness, it comes from values. But here's the difference. Dinobot's restraint is personal, Primal's restraint is positional. Dinobot protects his code, Primal protects his people. And Primal understands that ending a threat the wrong way, even if it's effective, changes what kind of leader he becomes. Because winning at the cost of your values doesn't make you strong, It just makes you faster becoming someone you don't recognize. It's the tension at the heart of leadership. Power solves problems immediately, but protection carries consequences indefinitely. In real life, this shows up everywhere. At work, when intimidation will get results faster than patience. At home, when anger would feel more satisfying than restraint. In leadership, when forcing compliance is easier than earning trust. Force creates obedience, but protection creates safety. And safety is fragile. It requires vigilance. It requires restraint. It requires choosing not to escalate when escalation would feel good. Both Dinobot and Primal understand something many leaders don't learn until it's too late. If you lead through domination, you teach others to fear you. If you lead through protection, you teach them to trust you. But trust is expensive. It drains you. It slows you down. It puts the weight on your shoulders instead of others. And that restraint, that constant choice to absorb danger instead of unleashing it, eventually costs Optimus Primal everything. Absorbing damage works. It works when you're strong. It works when you're present. It works when you can stand between danger and everyone else. But eventually, every leader reaches a moment where being the shield isn't enough anymore. Because the real test of leadership doesn't come when you're standing in front of the threat. It comes when you're not there at all. When Optimus Primal is removed from the fight, something important happens. Nothing collapses. There's no panic, no chaos, no desperate scramble for control. Leadership continues. And it's not an accident, because Primal never built a system that only worked if he was standing at the center of it. This is the moment many leaders fear most. The moment where you're forced to step away and find out whether what you build can survive without you. For Primal, this isn't a failure of strength. It's a test of design. Rhinox steps into his role exactly as you'd expect. Calm, measured, prepared. Rhinox represents intentional trust, the kind of leadership that's earned long before it's needed. Strategy over impulse, stability over spectacle. Primal trusting Rhinox isn't weakness, it's foresight. It's proof that leadership isn't about doing everything yourself. It's about knowing who should carry what weight when you can't. The leadership isn't always passed to the perfect candidate. Sometimes, responsibility spreads wherever it has to, and that's where Rat Trap comes in. Rat Trap doesn't step up because he's confident, he steps up because someone has to. He's imperfect, he doubts himself, he complains, yet still, he acts. Not brilliantly, not heroically, but enough. And that's the point. Leadership doesn't require dominance, it doesn't require perfection, it requires presence, distributed across people who were trusted before the crisis arrived. This is where many leaders get stuck. They confuse responsibility with control. They believe that if they aren't personally involved, everything will fall apart. But control isn't responsibility. Control is fear disguised as importance. Because if everything collapses without you, it's not leadership, it's fear. Fear of being replaced, fear of being unnecessary, fear that letting go means losing purpose. Real leadership does the opposite. It prepares people to act without you. It allows others to carry the weight. It accepts that outcomes won't always be clean, but they'll still be shared. Primal doesn't lose authority when he steps away. He proves it was never about dominance in the first place. That's the part most leaders don't see until it's too late. Sometimes, the hardest thing isn't standing in front of the danger. It's stepping back and trusting that what you built can stand on its own. That's a lesson I didn't recognize as a leader when running my comic shop, until holding on started costing me everything. There was a night, I worked late in my office for the comic shop while my newborn was asleep in the room next to me. The lights were still on in my office, orders half packed, invoices open on the screen. Nothing was wrong, not technically, but nothing was moving unless I moved it. If I didn't pack the orders, they waited. If I didn't answer messages, they stacked up. If I didn't post, promote, plan, or fix something, nothing happened. And I remembered realizing something quietly unsettling. Everything I built only worked if I was holding it together. At the time, that felt like responsibility. I told myself this is what leadership looked like, that if I just worked harder, stayed later, carried more, eventually it would stabilize. I wasn't chasing ego. I wasn't avoiding effort. I genuinely believed that keeping control meant keeping everyone safe, my family, our future, the dream I had committed to, so I held tighter. I stopped delegating things that could have been shared. I absorbed stress instead of distributing it. I convinced myself that exhaustion was the price of commitment, and from the outside, it looked noble. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the cost showed up, not as a catastrophe, but as erosion. I was present everywhere except where I mattered most. Mentally occupied, always almost done, Always one more thing to fix before I could rest. The shop was surviving, but I wasn't building something that could survive without me. That's when the truth finally surfaced. What I called responsibility was actually fear. Fear that if I stepped back, it would fall apart. Fear that trusting others would expose weakness. Fear that letting go meant I had failed. But control isn't leadership. It's a self-made prison, and you're the only one inside it. I wasn't protecting my family by carrying everything alone. I was teaching the system to depend entirely on me. And systems like that don't grow. Eventually, they collapse. The realization didn't come with relief. It came with grief, because walking away or even loosening my grip felt exactly like failure. It felt like admitting I wasn't strong enough to make it work, but staying was costing me everything. My energy, my presence, my ability to lead anything beyond the next emergency. That was the moment I finally understood what Optimus Primal was teaching all along. Leadership isn't about being indispensable. It's about building something that doesn't break when you step away. And learning that lesson didn't feel like victory. It felt like loss. It felt like heartbreak. Before we go any further, if you ever carried something longer than you should have, if you've ever confused holding everything together with leadership, if you've ever wondered whether letting go meant you failed, then you're exactly where you're supposed to be. This is Disassembled Heroes and Villains, not a show about winning, not a show about power fantasies, but a place to examine the figures we mythologize. Heroes who choose restraint when domination would be easier, leaders who carry responsibility long before confidence arrives, villains who mistake certainty for strength and collapse underneath it. Throughout this year, we're tracing a single question across characters, worlds, and moments. What kind of person are you becoming when no one is forcing your hand? We'll explore that tension through figures like Spawn, Captain America, Doomguy, and others who discover that doing the right thing often feels like loss before it feels like meaning. So if these questions matter to you, if you're trying to build something that survives you, subscribe. You're not late, you're not behind, you're right on time. Up to this point, we've talked about responsibility as something abstract, a burden, a system, a cost. But responsibility doesn't stay theoretical for long. Eventually, it takes shape, a face, a name. And while that shape looks different for everyone, the pressure feels for me, that responsibility changed the moment it stopped being optional. In my case, that responsibility took a new shape when I became a father. Not because fatherhood is the highest form of leadership, but because it stripped away performance entirely. There were no metrics, no milestones, no applause for getting it right, just presence and fear, a lot of fear. That kind of fear that doesn't paralyze you, but never leaves. The fear of failing someone who didn't choose to depend on you, and that fear surprised me. I thought fear meant weakness. I thought worry meant doubt. I thought confidence was the thing leaders were supposed to project. Responsibility taught me something different. Fear doesn't disqualify you. It clarifies what matters. Because when you truly don't care, you don't worry, you don't hesitate, you don't feel the weight. Worry is often the cost of caring deeply, and that's something Optimus Primal understands better than most leaders. Primal isn't fearless. He doubts himself constantly, he questions his decisions, he carries the weight of every loss, but he never disappears. He stays present, even when he's unsure, even when he's damaged, even when the outcome isn't guaranteed. That presence is what holds everything together, not his strength, not his authority, not his power. And that lesson extends far beyond fatherhood. It applies to anyone carrying responsibility they didn't fully ask for. A business, a marriage, a team, a family, a calling that arrived before you felt ready. We live in a culture obsessed with performance, with optimization, with looking like you have it under control. But responsibility doesn't ask for performance, it asks for presence. To show up tired, to show up unsure, to show up without answers. Because the people who depend on you don't need perfection, they need you to stay. That's the quiet truth at the heart of leadership, and the part no one advertises. You don't become responsible by being confident, you become confident by staying responsible long enough to change. Responsibility reshapes you. It sands down the ego, it exposes fear, it replaces ambition with stewardship. And if you let it, it turns fear into humility, worry into vigilance, and pressure into purpose. Optimus Primal doesn't lead because he's the strongest in the room. He leads because he carries the weight and refuses to set it down, even when it costs him. And that's the kind of leadership that doesn't just win battles, it builds something worth protecting. All of this, the fear, the restraint, the staying, it can sound abstract, noble even. But leadership isn't proven in a video essay, it's proven in practice. So before we close this out, it's worth asking a more uncomfortable question. What does this actually require of you when no one is watching, applauding, or keeping score? Optimus Primal doesn't teach the leadership through domination. He teaches it through burden. That distinction matters, especially for men, because most of us were taught, implicitly or explicitly, that leadership means control, that strength looks like certainty, that hesitation is weakness, that carrying the weight means you're doing it right. Primal shows us something harder. Leadership isn't dominance, it's restraint. Not the absence of power, but the discipline to choose when not to use it. Real strength includes knowing when force could solve the problem faster, and choosing not to take that shortcut, because shortcuts leave wreckage. Sacrifice doesn't mean failure, it just feels like it in the moment. Walking away from something you built, letting go of control, choosing the long path when the short one would make you feel powerful. None of that looks impressive from the outside, but that's the work. Carrying the weight is the role. Not because you're the only one capable, but because someone has to absorb the cost. Primal doesn't lead because he's fearless, he leads while afraid. He doesn't win because he's dominant, he wins because he stays present long enough for others to stand. That's the part worth sitting for. If you're exhausted, that doesn't mean you're failing. If you're worried, that doesn't mean you're weak. If the responsibility feels heavy, it's because it's real. That danger isn't feeling the weight. The danger is confusing the weight with your worth. Leadership doesn't ask you to be indestructible. It asks you to be reliable, to show up, to absorb the pressure, choose protection over pride, and to stay long enough for something stronger than you to take shape. That's what Optimus Primal teaches. Not how to command, but how to carry what matters without becoming the thing that breaks it. I'm still terrified of failing the people who depend on me. That fear hasn't gone away. If anything, it's sharper now, quieter, heavier. And Optimus Primal didn't teach me how to get rid of it. He taught me something far more important, that fear isn't a flaw, it's a signal. Because the absence of fear isn't confidence, it's distance. Primal carries doubt with him into every fight, every decision, every loss. Not because he's weak, but because he understands what's at stake. Responsibility doesn't make the fear disappear, it gives it a direction. It teaches you that worrying doesn't mean you're failing, it often means you're paying attention, that staying present matters more than looking powerful, that showing up imperfectly matters more than performing perfectly, that carrying the weight is the role, whether you ask for it or not. Leadership doesn't eliminate the fear of failing others, it teaches you how to live honestly alongside it. So if you're tired, if you're worried, if you're quietly asking yourself whether you're doing enough, you're not broken, you're carrying something real. And the men who worry about failing are usually the ones carrying it the most. So I'll leave you with this. Who depends on you, and how are you showing up for them? Not when it's impressive, not when it's rewarded, but when it's heavy. That's where leadership actually lives. That's where the story ends, and where the real work begins. If this conversation stayed with you, if it made you pause or rethink a moment you once justified, I'd genuinely like to hear it. What part of this episode hit closest to home, and why? Drop a comment, let's keep this conversation going. And if you want more episodes like this, where we break down heroes and villains not to admire them, but to understand how the stories we grew up with shape the people we become, make sure you're following Disassembled Heroes and Villains right here. So stay thoughtful, stay grounded, and as always, stay handsome.